You're the third pilot on a B-52 bomber, and in the dark, the plane is coming apart around you. Something in the right wing has just torn loose. The aircraft rolls, the nose drops, and the commander's voice fills your headset with two words: bail out. The men ahead of you have ejection seats that fire them clear of the plane. You don't. And somewhere in the black air beneath you, 2 hydrogen bombs are already falling. It's just past midnight, the 24th of January, 1961. You're the spare pilot tonight, with no ejection seat, just a parachute and a hatch in the roof you now have to reach.
8 minutes ago, this was routine.
You're on airborne alert. The Cold War job where bombers like yours stay in the sky around the clock, fueled and ready, so that no surprise attack can ever catch the whole fleet on the ground. You had just slid in behind a tanker to take on fuel when the boom operator radioed the thing no crew wants to hear. Your right wing is leaking. 37,000 pounds of fuel, gone in about 3 minutes. They wave off the refueling and send you into a holding pattern to burn down what's left. Then, as you start the descent toward home, the wing that has been carrying all that weight simply tears apart. There is no warning shutter, no second chance. One moment you are flying, the next you are inside a machine that is no longer a machine, reaching for a hatch in the roof. There is no graceful way to do what you are about to do. The bomber is spinning now, and the spin wants to pin you against your seat and keep you there until the ground arrives. Ahead of you, the others are punching out on their ejection seats. You unstrap. You drag yourself up toward the hatch against a force that is trying to fold you in half, and you push out into a freezing 100-mile-an-hour wind at 9,000 feet. The cold hits like a wall of water. You will become the only person anyone has ever recorded climbing out of a B-52's top hatch by hand and living to tell it. Your parachute opens with a hard crack above you, and now the only question that matters: where did the 2 bombs go? You come down in a farm field outside the little town of Faro, North Carolina, in the dead middle of the night. No fire, no enemy, no siren. Just frozen tobacco rows and the enormous, ringing quiet that comes after too much noise. You are alive. Of the 8 men who were aboard your aircraft a few minutes ago, 5 of you will walk away from this night. And for one moment, standing in that black field, the worst thing that has ever happened to you is also, mercifully, over. What you do not know yet, as you catch your breath, is that the single most dangerous object in the entire county is lying in the dark not far from where you stand, and it rode down out of the sky with you. Here is what your bomber was carrying over the farms of North Carolina. 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs. Not kiloton weapons like the ones that ended the Second World War. Each of these is rated at 3.8 megatons, hundreds of times the blast that destroyed Hiroshima. On a normal flight, a weapon like this is kept deliberately asleep. A chain of switches stands between it and a detonation, and the crew has to wake it on purpose before any real drop. That is the entire promise of the design. Nothing about an ordinary night, no accident, no fall, is ever supposed to be able to arm one of these on its own. But there is nothing ordinary about tonight. As your aircraft tore itself apart, one of those 2 bombs began, entirely by itself, to behave as if someone had finally given the order to use it. As it dropped, the first bomb did something the second one didn't. Its parachute opened. A 100-foot canopy, the very one it would use in a genuine attack, blooming open over the North Carolina dark to slow it down. And once that parachute was out, the weapon began stepping through its arming sequence, one stage after another, exactly as it would on a mission. For this bomb to detonate, 4 things have to happen in order. 3 of them happened. The firing capacitors charged, and when the bomb struck the ground, an impact switch closed and sent the one command it exists to send: fire. Everything that 3.8 megatons of city-killing power needed to come alive was now in motion. Everything, except for a single small part that had not moved. That part was a switch about the size of the dial on a stove. An arm-safe switch, low voltage, utterly unremarkable, and still resting, by chance, in the position marked safe. It was the one barrier the firing signal could not get past. Years later, a safety engineer at the Sandia laboratory named Parker Jones wrote it down with no drama at all. That one simple, low-voltage switch stood between the United States and a major catastrophe. The Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, would describe the same margin another way, saying the country had been saved by the failure of 2 wires to cross. 3 of 4 steps complete, 1 switch still holding. That is the entire distance between an ordinary January night and the worst day in American history. Now the honest version. Because on a story like this, the truth has to be exact. That switch holding does not mean the bomb was a heartbeat from going off by itself. To actually fire, it would have needed an electrical fault that the crash, as it happened, never delivered. And to this day, engineers still argue over whether the weapon would even have produced its full yield after a fall like that. So this was not a bomb counting down to 0. It was something quieter, and in its own way worse. A hydrogen bomb that had walked itself almost all the way to the end of its own checklist, by accident, with no enemy and no order, over a sleeping country that had absolutely no idea it was happening. Someone still has to walk up to that live bomb in the field and make it safe. The job falls to a 25-year-old explosive ordnance officer, Lieutenant Jack Revell, who takes the parachute weapon apart by hand, in the cold, without knowing how stable any of it is. He does it. The second bomb is a worse kind of problem. It came down with no parachute, hit a waterlogged field at full speed, and drove itself deep into the mud. And the piece that holds its uranium is still down there, roughly 180 feet beneath a North Carolina tobacco field. Crews dig for it. The hole keeps flooding. They dig again, and in the end they give up, seal it, and the government quietly buys the right to stop anyone from ever disturbing the ground above it. Part of that night is still in the soil of North Carolina today. Not every man walked out of that sky. Of the 8 aboard your aircraft, 3 did not survive the night. 2 were found in the broken nose of the fuselage, and a 3rd did not survive the night. They were the cost of a wing that failed on a mission flown, of all things, to keep a war from ever starting. The survivors were scattered to hospitals and then back to duty, and most of them said very little about any of it for a very long time. You, the 3rd pilot, the one who went out through the roof, you will live another 57 years, the last of the crew left to carry the memory of this field. For most of those years, the official answer to how close it came will be a flat, confident, not close at all. For decades, the reassurance held. There had never been any real danger. The safety systems had done their job. Move along. But Parker Jones's report, the one with the line about the single switch, was classified and stayed that way. It took a writer named Eric Schlosser, a Freedom of Information request, and the year 2013 before the public could finally read, in the government's own words, just how thin the margin over Goldsboro had truly been. And that same memo carried a second, colder verdict, one the Air Force had not been advertising, that this model of bomb did not have adequate safety for the job it was actually doing, riding around the clock, fully built, under American wings. Goldsboro was not a one-off accident either. Before that January night, that same kind of arm-safe switch had already been tripped by mistake dozens of times across the bomber fleet. The only thing different here was that everything else in the chain lined up neatly behind it. This was the bargain of airborne alert, spelled out in the open at last. To make absolutely certain the Soviet Union could never disarm America in a single surprise blow, the United States kept live hydrogen bombs in the air above its own farms and its own towns, every hour of every day. The country was being protected by those bombs and put at risk by them in the very same breath. Goldsboro was simply the night the second half of that bargain almost came due. So, could you survive it? You, the spare pilot with no ejection seat, going out the roof of a falling bomber? The record says yes. You climb out, you pull the handle, your chute opens, and you live for another half a century. But the real survivor of that night was never a single person. It was a country that came within one low-voltage switch of putting a 3.8 megaton crater in the middle of its own map, and that only learned how close it had come 50 years later, and only then after a Freedom of Information fight. Goldsboro did not get safer because the men got luckier. It got safer because the bombs were changed. The switch held exactly once. After that, the people who built these weapons quietly decided they could never again afford to trust a single switch. Goldsboro was one bomb, one switch, one frozen field. But it was not the last time the Cold War almost ended by accident instead of by decision. There is another night, 22 years later, when a single Soviet officer sat in a bunker, staring at a screen that insisted American missiles were already in the air, with about 20 minutes to decide whether to believe it. Next time, that officer is you.